Welcome back, everyone. My name is Michelle, and this is Horror Book Hell Hound. So today I am here to talk to you about two books that I have read this month that blew me away. So yeah, two for the price of one, book reviews. Of course they are horror. Let's just dive into it, shall we? So the first book that we're going to talk about today is Hunted by Darcy Coates. This book shocked me. For those of you who have been reading Darcy Coates' work for quite some time, you know all of the different writing styles she is able to portray. For me, I have only read about 2 or 3 of her books, all within the haunted house trope, all within kind of the same vein. So I did not recognize who I was reading when I read this book. And honestly, I was happy about that. Don't get me wrong, absolutely love Darcy Coates' cozy, creepy reads. I fall back on them all the time to kind of decompress after reading some seriously fucked up shit or some stressful, painful books. So picking up this one, I knew I was going to be in for a slightly different ride because we don't have your typical haunted house trope here. I'm going to go ahead and read you the back of the book so you have a synopsis of what goes on in the book, and then we'll dive in a little deeper. 5 days after Eileen Hirschberger went missing on a hike through the remote Ashlow Forest, her camera was discovered washed down river containing bizarre photos taken hours after her disappearance. But with no body and no additional clues, finding Eileen in the dark and winding woods seems next to impossible. Chris wants to believe his sister is still alive. When the police search is abandoned, he and 4 of his friends vow to scour the mountain range until they find Eileen and bring her home. But as the small group strays farther from the trails and the unsettling discoveries mount, they begin to realize they're not alone, and Eileen's disappearance was no accident. This honestly is one of Darcy Coates' chunkier books. Her newest book that just came out, which I believe is called From Below, is also chunky just like this. I'm wondering if it is written similarly to this one in a very different style from her normal books. So the one thing that I loved the absolute most about this book was the character building. You start the book off with so many different perspectives. We have Eileen's perspective as she gets whatever's happening to her is happening to her. Then you have the disappearance, the fallout, her family's perspectives, mainly her brother, and the boy that is semi-obsessed / in love with her, no idea. And you get some of the perspectives of their mutual friends. The one perspective I was in love with the most, though, was the cop's perspective, which I believe her name was Carla. Yes, Carla. She is this missing persons detective, forest ranger type. I think she works for the sheriff's department. Anyway, needless to say, she's law enforcement in this podunk little town outside of Ashlow Forest. And it's strange because, reading her perspective at the beginning of the book versus the end is so drastically different. She goes through such an amazing character development throughout this book, from just this beat down cop who doesn't really give a shit and just wants to get her work done and go home, who's leading somewhat of a miserable life, to an actual cop, someone who you wish would be a police officer, if you know what I mean. Someone who genuinely seems to care and actually utilizes their training to dive deeper into what is going on. And there is a lot going on in this book. There's a lot of twists and turns in here. At first you go in thinking it's a creature feature, and then it kind of smacks you in the face with something completely different. Now, that not to get misunderstood, there are a lot of key moments in this book that are somewhat predictable, but overall, I was fascinated. I was very fascinated with how this book played out. In the normal books that I read by Darcy Coates, there seems to usually be a happy ending. Not many people, if anyone, actually dies. There's not a lot of heartbreak. In this book, she broke out of that box in such an amazing way. There is death, there is gore, there is heartbreak. There's also a sense of hope and renewal by the end, though. A sense of not all being lost, which is amazing. All in all, I was just blown away by this book because it's not what I'm used to when it comes to Darcy Coates. There was so much more to it. And that's not to belittle her other work because, like I said, I absolutely love her cozy, creepy works where it's just super... I hesitate to say lighthearted because it's not that it's lighthearted, it's just tropes that you're comfortable with, kind of working inside of the box per se when it comes to writing horror. We can see her stepping outside of the box in a really big way. And honestly, like, I just fell so in love with the character of Carla and the character of, I want to say her name was Heather. You get to dive into Haley. Haley was her name, not Heather. You get to dive into so many different characters in this book, and you really get to see their growth and their development, and it is just so mind-boggling. So that was really beautiful. I really enjoyed this book. Honestly, I rated it a 5 out of 5. Is it perfect? No. Is it perfect to me? Yes. Okay, so before we move on to the next one, I just want to let you guys know that it is raining, so I'm trying to film in between the loud moments of rain. So let's dive back in. The next book that I want to talk to you guys about is Sundial by Catriona Ward. Holy shit. This book got to me on an elemental, molecular level, okay? I actually rated this book a 4 out of 5. Now, some of you might be like, what the fuck's wrong with you, Michelle? This is like a literary piece of art. And yes, it is. But some of my star rating choices are also about enjoyability. And this is by no means a feel-good book. Okay, and I mean, we run into this in the horror community all the time. Most horror novels are not feel-good novels. But whereas I totally believe I will read Hunted by Darcy Coates again in the future, I am not entirely sure I will read this one again in the future. That being said, I am excessively happy that I did read this book. This book made me feel things I have not felt in a long time, like decades. This book made me feel everything. I cried because of this book, which, let's face it, it's not hard to make me cry. But I cried because of this book. I was angry because of this book. I wanted to throw things. I couldn't put this book down once I started. I flew through this book because I had to know what happened next. I had to keep reading. I had to keep reading. It's like watching a fucking train coming towards you and not wanting to move because you want to know if it's going to hit you. Is it going to hit me? Is it? Maybe I'm the only one that has that thought. Anyway, this book is amazing. I highly recommend everyone in the world to read this book. There is so much depth. There is so much depth to the story, to the characters, to the symbolism, to just everything. What you think this book is going to be is not what it is at all. At all. Like, you might think that you had this book figured out in the first few chapters, and no, the fuck, you don't. I cannot stress it enough that this book is crazy, but in a good way, in a fascinating way. There's so much frustration. Trigger warnings. There is a lot of abuse in this book, but it's not like your typical idea of abuse, right? It's not necessarily people hauling off and socking each other in the face. It's more insidious than that. It's more downright evil, in my opinion. And that's not obviously to downplay physical abuse, but it's just so malevolent. It's so psychological. That's what it is. It's psychological abuse to its core. To its core. And there is so much. There's so much unpacking to do with this book. And you hate some of these characters with a passion that I have not felt, again, in a very long time. It is difficult for me to feel so passionately about a book or a movie. I can't even think of the last book I read that I felt this passionately about. But I'm going to tell you right now, Sundial is passionate. Sundial is raw. Sundial is so psychologically fucked that... And it's not fucked up in like your splatterpunk idea of just like, let's see if we can gross them out, let's see if we can gross them out. It's fucked in the never saw that shit coming kind of way. In the unpacking of the characters and their history, and this like somewhat supernatural vibe to the whole story just adds so much. And there's not really, like, you know, like I was left questioning at the end of the book if there was any kind of supernatural forces at work, but it's one of those books that just kind of leaves that open to interpretation. Childhood trauma, major cases of abuse, especially psychological and verbal abuse. I felt quite traumatized after reading this book, but I also felt liberated after reading this book. I felt free, and that's kind of what our main character goes through, you know, spending her whole life basically entrapped in certain situations and circumstances, and you feel so much pain for this woman and this girl. You just feel so much fucking pain. This is the first book by Catriona Ward I have ever read, and if her other books are written similarly to this, with this amount of depth and emotion, I'm definitely going to have to check them out, because I was blown away by that. I was very impressed. I highly recommend anyone to read this book, but just know that it's definitely not a feel-good. And it's gonna hurt to read this book. But I think that's the point. I love it. I love that it was able to bring emotion out in me, because it's so rare that books can do that. I loved it. I can't stop raving about it. And I mean, obviously it was not an enjoyable experience per se, because it was so fucked. But it's just one of those books that once you get through it, you're really glad that you read it. Because for some... And I can't say that that is for everyone, because obviously everyone has different tastes. Everyone has different styles of writing that speak to them. This particular book spoke to me on an emotional level that I wasn't really ready for. I probably like wept for about 5 to 10 minutes after finishing this book, because it was just so... I don't even have a word for it. Just all the emotions, all of it. But very interesting. There were some surprise scenes throughout this book that shocked the hell out of me, that I wasn't prepared for. But that were so welcomed. There's definitely some scenes of horror. It's not all just about man versus man type shit that we read on a daily basis. There's some major moments of horror and realization. The horror that you experience in Sundial is along the same lines as Hunted in a way, just because it's that it's that horrifying feeling of how can people do this shit to other people. You know what I mean? Like, it's just... And to me, books like this are actually scarier in a lot of ways than like creature features and supernatural and paranormal books that don't really have a basis in reality. Because at first, this book doesn't seem like it has a basis in reality. And there are moments that seem completely supernatural and paranormal, but the core of the book is the main pieces of horror that you feel are based off of what people are doing to each other. And it's difficult. It's difficult to deal with, but I am so very happy that I read both of these books. Again, that was Hunted by Darcy Coates, and that was Sundial by Catriona Ward. Both of these books are fantastic. I gave Hunted 5 out of 5. I gave Sundial 4 out of 5 based off of my personal ratings and the enjoyment factor. However, literarily, if that's even a fucking word. However, like, if we're just basing Sundial off of how well it's written and how amazing of a story it is, it also gets a 5 out of 5. Will I ever read it again? Not unless I really feel like crying. But both books, fantastic. Highly recommend both of them. This month was pretty fucking good. I will go over some of the other books that I read this month during my reading wrap up next month. So be sure to be on the lookout for that. And I hope you all are staying dry out there. I don't know where all of you are from, but here in my neck of the woods, it has been raining forever. So, and obviously that's a joke. And no complaints. We need the rain here. But yeah, a little crazy right now. But yeah. If you enjoyed today's video, please give a thumbs up. It helps me out quite a bit. If you haven't subscribed already, go ahead and hit subscribe. And comment down below if you feel the need to. I will also have my other social media links linked down below, so be sure to check those out. And until next time, peace out, Hell Hounds.